At last, I've read Slaughterhouse Five by Kurt Vonnegut. In my lifelong quest to read classic literature, Slaughterhouse Five has been on my to-be-read list for 20 years. After over 40 years of hearing about the excellence of Vonnegut's satire, social critique, black humor, and anti-war message, I was expecting something like a cross between Spider Robinson and George Orwell. Not what I was expecting. I was a bit underwhelmed by Slaughterhouse Five at first, and we're going to talk about it right now. Welcome to Matt Reviews Books, and I am Matt. And this is a book-related and book review channel. I talk about all sorts of books. Books that I read, books that I like. Not really the books that I don't like. You won't hear about those too much unless it is egregiously bad. But not today. Today, we're talking about a piece of classic American literature. Today, we're talking about Slaughterhouse Five by Kurt Vonnegut. And yes, this is the first time I've read any Kurt Vonnegut. And this was the first one I decided to go with as, I don't know, I guess I Googled what's the best Kurt Vonnegut book to start with. And as I said in the introduction, I was a little overwhelmed. I was not overwhelmed. I was underwhelmed. The first 50 pages were a little bit hard for me to get into. Specifically, the first chapter is a little, I don't know, I didn't know what was going on. And then things get rocking and rolling. Specifically, in those 50 pages, I couldn't understand how the obviously depressed narrator was going to be an entertaining read. However, after I got away from my preconceptions about what I thought Kurt Vonnegut was going to be like, I really enjoyed Slaughterhouse Five. It is a nice example of clean, simple writing, very reminiscent of other books from the 50s and 60s, such as The Stars Like Dust, Catcher in the Rye, and Fahrenheit 451. There were also different themes that jumped out at me that I was not really expecting to be thinking about, such as the lasting impact of post-traumatic stress on combat vets, or possibly even the state of somebody's mental health in addition to post-traumatic stress. But what is Slaughterhouse Five about? Well, on the one hand, it's about a writer who is struggling with his memories of the bombing of Dresden while he was a POW in Dresden. And so he begins to write a book using a fictional character, Billy Pilgrim, as his avatar. I wrote on Twitter that Billy Pilgrim is a head case and the narrator is damaged. It's obvious by the time we meet Billy Pilgrim in Chapter 2 that the narrator is dealing with some serious post-traumatic stress. And so he writes Billy Pilgrim as being nuts, because that's how he feels about his life. Now, Billy is a low-key guy in a world full of alpha males. He's a chaplain's assistant, which means that he's basically a clerk, a secretary for a military minister or a priest. During wartime, chaplain's assistant is also expected to be, more or less, a human shield for the chaplain. Billy carries no weapon and has no aspirations of being a combat soldier. When he is transferred to a new chaplain who is stationed on the Western Front, on the European front, he immediately gets lost. He is found by other lost soldiers and they help each other to survive, or rather, they help him survive long enough to be captured by German troops Vonnegut describes Billy's processing through a concentration camp with hundreds of other prisoners of war. The POWs are transported in cattle rail cars where men die standing up and their bodies are thrown into ditches. The Germans who guard the prisoners are really no more malicious than the Americans, but that's really not a high bar to set. From Billy's perspective, he's surrounded by venality and self-conceit equal to that of any of the German soldiers. At the same time, we're witnessing a rather gentle soul being placed in dire and brutal circumstances. We also witness Billy's struggles later in life with the psychological and emotional damage that is his legacy from the war, including what appear to be fugue states and dissociation with hallucinations of aliens called Tralfamadorians. Tralfamadorians are described as plumber's friends with very flexible bodies and a hand at the end with a big eye in the middle. I had to look up what a plumber's friend was. It's a plunger. These periods are described not as hallucinations, but as actual events in which Billy takes part. The people surrounding Billy don't experience his hallucinations, so it's easy to discount them as only being in Billy's head. However, the Tralfamadorians explain to Billy that time isn't something that they experience the same way that humans experience time. For them, they are able to experience every point in time simultaneously. So it is that they don't see death as a tragedy or an end. They simply see it as another stage of existence. And as part of that reality, Billy adopts some of their philosophy so that in the face of death, he simply says, "So it goes." Notably, Billy is abducted so that Tralfamadorians can observe him like he's an animal in a zoo. They match him with a human female, a young actress by the name of Montana Wildhack, and they have a child together on Tralfamador. With the ability of Tralfamadorians to see multiple points in time simultaneously allows Vonnegut to have a certain fluid aspect to the storytelling, and it allows him to be able to illustrate the absurdity of humans at war. In a scene where Billy waits to be abducted by the Tralfamadorians, he watches an old World War II movie. Except he watches the movie backwards, from end to beginning. And so it is that watches the destruction of bullets and bombs being pulled from the devastated bodies and buildings in the war until they're brought back into the airplane, and the airplane returns to the airfield. And those bombs and bullets are ultimately disassembled and returned as elements into the earth. It's here that Billy Pilgrim observes the two distinct states of matter. In one, it is an inert part of the environment, and in another, under human use, it is a dangerous tool. What is otherwise prosaic is turned by people into devastation. Billy's time dissociation also seems consistent with what I know of PTSD. Memories of trauma can be so vivid that they seem like they're real to the people who are experiencing them. In many ways, the book is actually a flashback for a middle-aged, older Billy Pilgrim. Because of this, perhaps it is that Kurt Vonnegut also dealt with PTSD from his time in the war. Both Erich Maria Remarque and Kurt Vonnegut wrote cautionary tales about war. As All Quiet on the Western Front is to World War I, Slaughterhouse Five is to World War II. Slaughterhouse Five focuses squarely on the aftermath of the bombing of Dresden. The bombing of Dresden was a British-American aerial bombing attack on the city of Dresden, Germany, during World War II. In 4 raids from February 13th to February 15th, 1945, 722 heavy bombers of the British Royal Air Force and 527 bombers of the United States Air Forces dropped more than 3,900 tons of high explosive bombs and incendiary devices on the city. The bombing and the resulting firestorm destroyed more than 1,600 acres of the city, and as many as 25,000 people were killed. One of the seemingly obvious aspects of the story is how much Billy Pilgrim seems to struggle with post-traumatic stress. PTSD is a series of symptoms related to the long-term after effects of a traumatic event. It can include flashbacks to the event, upsetting dreams or nightmares, and changes in physical and emotional reactions. In Billy's case, characters describe him as talking about the war in his sleep. When his wife asks about the war, he refuses to talk about it. And in a scene where he's with his barbershop quartet, he begins crying uncontrollably and unable to control his emotion. Additionally, Billy has an emotional distance from his family, from his wife and his children, and he often seems to treat them as if they are strangers. The narrator, who could assume to be Kurt Vonnegut, states that Billy often cried in private, silently. Another aspect of Slaughterhouse Five that kind of jumped out at me was how it seemed less of a science fiction story because there were aliens, and more that the aliens maybe were a result of Billy being schizophrenic. Schizophrenia involves a range of problems involved in behavior, thinking, and emotion. Symptoms may vary, but may include things like delusions, which are the false belief that are not based in reality, or hallucinations, which is seeing or hearing things that are not there. Even in the world of Slaughterhouse Five, it's highly unlikely that Billy Pilgrim was abducted by aliens, no matter how real it seems to him. And yet, Billy very much sees and hears things that other people don't see or hear, and he very firmly believes that he has been abducted by aliens for the purpose of mating with a film star and having a life on Tralfamador. In men, the symptoms of schizophrenia often seem to be exhibited in early to mid-20s. Given the average age of a soldier in World War II, Billy Pilgrim is perfect age for symptoms to begin manifesting. In addition to him being exposed to an incredibly traumatic event like the bombing of Dresden, there's the real possibility that Billy's PTSD and schizophrenia feed into each other, with one being triggered by the other later in life. None of this is original scholarship. People have been writing about PTSD and schizophrenia in Slaughterhouse Five, and whether or not that might be a reflection of Vonnegut's own struggles for years now. Slaughterhouse Five is the story of a man who builds what many people would call a successful life, all the while coexisting with his own personal demons and trauma. As much as it can be called a critique of war, Slaughterhouse Five also feels like a personal letter from Vonnegut, putting his public life in a context with his personal realities. It's an aspect of the book that isn't often cited, in contrast to the black humor and the satire and the anti-war message. It's certainly an aspect of the book that I wasn't expecting. It's true that you can't judge a book by its cover. With Slaughterhouse Five, I learned that you can't judge a book by its reputation either. That's all for me. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your time. And if you liked this, please consider subscribing. Hit like if you liked it, and comment. Let me know what you thought about Slaughterhouse Five, or let me know what your favorite Kurt Vonnegut book is if you're a fan. My next one I think I'm going to read is Cat's Cradle. And with that, again, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.